Hello, people out there in the interwebs. Hopefully, this works okay. If not, let me know in the comment boxes. Um, I wanted to share a couple of observations from a some chats I had today on Capitol Hill. I'm in Washington D.C. with Democratic members of the Senate. Um, I did an interview on the Hill. I think it's still called Rising, right? That show with Robbie Suave earlier today. So I'm not sure if that's up yet, but if you're interested, be on the lookout for that. And then I went to Capitol Hill, and it was a very interesting scene. Um, there was a meeting held today around lunchtime at the Senate Democratic Congressional Committee building, which is right off the Capitol. And this was a meeting that had been convened by the Senate Democratic leadership, I suppose, although I didn't see Chuck Schumer. I'm not sure whether he was there or not. And Biden campaign officials. So Mike Donilon was there, I believe. That's how you pronounce his name. Who was one of the senior political advisors to Biden in the campaign. And there was a modest group of reporters and media people who were sort of camped outside this building. I would actually have thought that would have been more. Maybe people don't like being in DC in the dog days in summer. It is brutally hot, but I weathered it for all you people. And I was able to speak at least briefly to a decent number of Democratic senators. And people were sending me screenshots a little while ago of my exchange apparently being caught on camera with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island. ABC was filming this. I mean, maybe I was just oblivious, but I didn't even notice that there was a camera in proximity. So there you have it. I mean, the reporter who was asking Sheldon Whitehouse questions just asked all the most banal, pointless, superficial, transient style questions, just like news cycle tethered questions that really have no real relevance. I posted a clip a couple of minutes ago on my feed. I am going to get it set up where I have screen share readily available. But I'm kind of doing an impromptu thing now where I'm on the road. Going to be going to the Republican convention straight from DC. And I'm going to be driving, which I haven't done a lengthy road trip in a while, so I'm looking forward to that. But the exchange with Sheldon Whitehouse, maybe I'll try to play it on my phone. I know that's not most ideal, but here you go. Why not? You guys have to bear with me. I always have a bit of a low tech setup. I'll try to get that remediated at some point soon. So there's me and Sheldon Whitehouse. Again, maybe I was just totally oblivious, but I did not realize this was being filmed. Not that I care. I just didn't happen to notice. And here is the exchange. So, I mean, as you might recall, part of the reason why I've been doing streams again lately is because I'm losing my mind that nobody in the media, nobody even really who has any connection to these Democratic insiders who were flipping out and coming out with their commands for Biden to withdraw, none of them have any interest in the substance of the presidency. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. Like it or not, I tend not to like it so much, but like it or not, the president has just enormous, unfathomable unilateral powers. The most staggering of which is arguably, probably almost certainly, his sole authority over the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Now, people think that I'm a little wacky or I'm obsessed with niche subjects when I raise this, but if the president does have Parkinsonisms, which I just learned recently is actually a plural noun, and is distinct from Parkinson's disease or Parkinson's syndrome, which is one of the types of Parkinson's isms, which is a hard word to pronounce. If the president is afflicted with one of those ailments, And he is, God forbid, in a scenario where he has to be rustled out of bed at 3 a.m. in the classic, emergency scenario, and have to make a virtually split second, 6 minutes or less decision as to whether to issue the irreversible order to launch nuclear missiles from the ground, sea, and air based launchers. Maybe not being at peak mental capacity could be a problem there. Now, even a president who is 45 and could ace any mental acuity test, you would worry about his ability to make a sound decision in those circumstances. For somebody in his 80s, remember, Biden, he claims he's running for the second term. There was nothing that cast doubt on that in his NATO summit press conference. He would be 86 during the duration of that second term. So, yeah, obviously he should be questioned, and Democrats should be questioned, and anybody should be questioned about his current capacity to execute his functions and do his duties as president. But I think, and I've said this before, but I really do think it crystallizes the issue to just note that, taking what he's saying at face value in terms of his plans to continue running this current campaign, he would be 86 during that prospective second term. Okay. And anybody who has concerns or is troubled or whatever sort of wishy-washy verb you want to use about Biden's performance now really ought to be asked, at least for the historical record, if nothing else. Do they seriously think that Biden could capably perform his job responsibilities at age 86? Again, the most extreme of which is his unilateral authority over the nuclear arsenal. So that's the question I've been going around and asking every Dem insider I can. And I guess I'm the only one. Nobody else cares, apparently. They all just want to, do these fleeting little pestering type questions about very, again, transient political considerations. What about Kamala Harris, that sort of thing. Because I think, a lot of journalists are, they buy into the whole nonsense about Trump being this existential threat to humanity and democracy, and the apocalypse is imminent, as if we didn't live through the previous Trump administration. And it was basically Jeb Bush with some wacky tweets. And, he did the corporate tax cuts. And I mean, civilization did not cease to exist, or democracy didn't end because there was a goofball riot at the Capitol on January 6th of 2021, which was squashed within a couple of hours. And yeah, it did temporarily delay a congressional proceeding, but like, congressional proceedings are not synonymous with the continued existence of democracy. I mean, nobody really follows through that logical progression to its conclusion and explains why they think that this means that, democracy is teetering on the brink of collapse. But anyway, so a lot of these pundits who are so fretful about Biden, they want to they're doing like a wish casting thing where they want Biden to step aside. They want him to withdraw his campaign because they don't feel he has the ability to beat Trump. Maybe some of them will even now admit that he probably shouldn't be president at age 86. I don't know why they just had that revelation within the past 2 weeks, but we'll leave that aside. And so they ask him these kind of very superficial questions about, his current political standing, which, it is a notable story. I did a whole interview about it earlier today. But there's also like other substantive issues that you would hope that maybe like now and then somebody might raise. So I asked that of Sheldon Whitehouse and a bunch of other senators earlier today. So I will play the clip by somewhat embarrassingly just putting my phone to the microphone. So let me know if you can hear this. So you're leaving aside the specifics of the meeting, which we understand is private. Do you have confidence that Biden at age 86, which is how old he will be to serve the full next term, has the capacity to reliably preside over the U.S. nuclear arsenal, which confers extraordinary unilateral powers on the executive? I'm not going to be talking about this while we sort our situation out internally. So his answer there is, I'm not going to be talking about this while we sort out our situation internally. So he's talking about within, I guess, the Democratic uh, conference in the Senate. Does it mean the Democratic Party writ large? Does he just mean like the whole Biden melodrama in general? I'm not sure. He didn't clearly clarify. And then I had a follow up exchange that was kind of humorous. Oh yeah, and then he said he's not gonna discuss it, and then I asked him why not, and he doesn't answer. Why not? Just one question for you. On the way into that meeting, leaving, you told me that you were going to. This is the ABC woman who asked nothing of substance. Any of your concerns that you have about President Biden's path forward? I think I'll just stay quiet on that. He says, I think I'll stay quiet on that front. I mean, if you want to read into what he's saying, it seems like he probably is rather convinced at this point that Biden ought to withdraw. That seems to be his belief, but of course he doesn't say so explicitly here. But I don't know what other inference you can draw based on his. I mean, what I wanted to mention is that I mean, you can't exactly tell there, but he really did seem shell shocked. He seemed in a state of disbelief. He seemed like he was, stunned, or he didn't have his really wits about him. He seemed like he just emerged from like a funeral, or like a shocking funeral of a loved one, or I don't know how to exactly describe it. But actually, the way I put it initially in my first tweet about it was he looked like he had just seen a ghost. Now there were reports after this meeting among Senate Democrats and the Biden campaign officials that tempers flared, or there was some consternation within the meeting. We don't have full details on that. None of them wanted to address specifically what happened in the meeting. So if you notice in my initial question to him, I prefaced it by saying, look, I realize that you don't want to discuss the specifics of the meeting, because he had said that already before I started recording, because I wanted to give him an opening to actually discuss the substantive issue for once. But he wouldn't. But there's another small piece of the exchange. Cordial and constructive. Okay, but not necessarily a not. I'm not going to characterize it. I don't think I've ever seen Senate Democrats looking so dour. Is that an accurate characterization? Okay, so that's me saying to him, I don't think I've ever seen Senate Democrats looking so dour, which is true. I mean, everybody who was filing out of that office building, or that townhouse, really did look anguished, I guess is the way to put it. Now, of course, I'm doing a little bit of reading body language and just examining facial expressions and demeanor, but Sheldon Whitehouse in particular, he looked like he was in a bad state. Democrats looking so dour. Characterization, or am I just disinterpreting? I don't know where you're getting that. The facial expressions of your colleagues that are leaving and their demeanor. Okay, so he says, I don't know where you're getting that, meaning my characterization of Senate Democrats as looking very dour. And I say, well, it's based on my observations of your colleagues' facial expressions and their demeanor and whatnot. That's your characterization. That's true. That's why I asked if you would verify it. If not, I respect that. Okay, and then he said, that's your characterization, not mine. I said, that's true. It is my characterization, which is why I asked you if you would verify my characterization, and he said nothing further. Right. So that was pretty indicative. I mean, I think Sheldon Whitehouse was probably a little bit out front in expressing concerns about Biden, even probably before mostly any Senate Democrat had. So I think he did an interview with like a local Rhode Island news station or TV station where he probably went further than any of his Democratic colleagues had at the time in saying that debate was horrendous and Biden must do X, Y, and Z to prove that he yada yada yada. Yeah. So clearly none of his spirits had not been raised, seemingly, by that meeting he had at the Senate campaign committee uh, office. Um, but it wasn't just him. I mean, I asked Senator Ben Cardin, who is the Democratic senator from Maryland, the same question about the nuclear arsenal, and his answer wasn't direct. I did a tweet about this earlier. I'll bring it up. Um, okay, so there's the tweet from earlier. Here's the exact quote, as I know because I transcribed it. Here's what I asked him: "Quote, do you think?" And I know I'm repetitive with this, but I don't know what else to do other than keep repeating it. Nobody else asks anything even approaching this kind of question. It seems like if you think that Biden must stand down because he can't beat Trump. I mean, can't anybody ever provide a corrective where they steer the conversation toward at least some hint of substance, at least once in a while? Like, I know the political stuff is significant. I mean, who wins a presidential election has an impact. But there's like a level beyond that. You would hope that every now and then somebody would reference, but I think I'm the only one doing it. So I've done it with Congressman Josh Gottheimer back in New Jersey, who was gallivanting around a 4th of July parade. I did it with Gavin Newsom, who was in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And I have posts about that on mtracy.net, Tracy with an E, if you want to subscribe, whatever. And then today it was several Democratic senators. And so I don't know. It's just, I feel like I'm on an island with this, but so be it. I said, my quote to him was, "Do you think somebody says this guy operates tech like a boomer? I'll accept that. I really should." Sometimes I just feel like an impulse to do one of these streams that I don't have everything set up ahead of time to share my screen and whatever, but I'll get it sorted eventually. So I asked him, quote, "Do you think Joe Biden has the cognitive, mental, and physical capacity to retain control over the U.S. nuclear arsenal at age 86, which is how old he would be if he were to serve through the next term?" Straightforward, clear, I would hope. His response was, quote, "I support Joe Biden." Now, that doesn't directly answer the question. The direct answer to the question might be, I don't know, yes, no. I mean, to give Gavin Newsom kind of some perverse credit, he did say yes to that question. And I followed up saying, quote, "So you do think he has the cognitive capacity to preside over the nuclear arsenal?" Cardin says in reply, quote, "I have confidence in our president." Slight evasion. And then I said, "Okay." And that was it. But even he, I mean, he was maybe in slightly better spirits, seemingly. But I had another exchange with John Fetterman. There you go, who is the Democratic senator from Pennsylvania. As people know, he's one of Biden's staunchest supporters now. He was with him on Sunday, last Sunday, when Biden did a swing through Pennsylvania, making campaign stops. And Fetterman, bellowed that I'm pointing at the only guy who's ever beat Donald Trump, and he pointed at Biden. Everybody was very excited by that, I guess. The most confusing thing about Fetterman is, look, I know I get the unusual attire approach that he has, but it was hot today in Washington, D.C. Thankfully, it was a little less hot than yesterday. Yesterday was like in a tropical rainforest where you could hardly breathe. Today was a little bit less humid, thank God, which is always the worst part of the D.C. summer weather. And not to get on a whole weather tangent, but I mean, it was well over 90 degrees. I mean, I was sweating like a pig. I mean, I can't control that. So I fully admit that I can't control that in the DC July weather. But to be walking, to have a giant hoodie on in July in DC, that's wild. But there you have it. I guess it's what makes him comfortable. So I asked John Fetterman the same question, and first he didn't respond. That's like a typical politician thing. I don't know whether it has to do with his potential cognitive issue, which does seem to have gotten better recently after that stroke. But he just at first I asked him the question, and I could get the audio out. Maybe I should have prepared this ahead of time. I'll find it because, of course, Laura Loomer was there, so she was running around. Uh, Making a hubbub. So I was inadvertently once again on video. If I could find this quickly, hopefully. Okay, here we go. You can find the content page. This isn't me, obviously. Oh my gosh, you're all so kooky. Oh, so that's not like. Hold on. Let's see if I. Okay, I can't find. It's not obvious where that is on this video, but I asked him that question that I've asked virtually every Dem insider or whomever for the past however long it's been, week and a half, and he said that it was a kooky question, and he did this whole like jazz hands thing to like dismiss the legitimacy of the question. And I just kept following up because we're like walking. The senators were walking from the Senate campaign committee building back into the Capitol, and so you have an opportunity to kind of buttonhole them, I guess is one of the terms used, and ask them a question. So there were a bunch of reporters there trying to do this, and so I kept asking, like, "How is that a kooky question? Can you explain? I mean, like, what precisely makes that question kooky?" He didn't provide an answer. So there you have it. Who else did I ask the question of? Oh, I tried to ask the question of Mark Warner, senator from Virginia, wealthiest member of the Senate by net worth, as an aside. And he had been the senator who it was reported was trying to organize some kind of effort to approach Biden or register discontent with Biden's continuation of his campaign. It was unclear what exactly the purpose of it was. And then after that leaked, he came out and canceled that meeting. But he also looked very dour. And he would just straight up ignored my question about the nuclear arsenal. Joe Manchin, who recently declared that he was an independent, had left the Democratic Party, but like Bernie Sanders and Kyrsten Sinema, still caucuses with the Democrats in the Senate. So he was present at that meeting. And Angus King. So they're actually, I think I saw a stat recently that there are more independents in the Senate right now than maybe ever or in a very long time. So there are 4 of them, which is interesting. And they all caucus with the Democrats. 2 of them left the Democratic. 2 of them, repudiated their Democratic Party affiliation, became independents, but still caucused with the Democrats. That's Sinema and Manchin. And Manchin didn't respond. Then also Chris Murphy, who also looked dour. I'm really not exaggerating. He looked like he was unhappy, to say the least. And I asked him the question as he was going. He actually went across the street back into one of the Senate office buildings. Because you can take like a secret, not secret, but you can take like an underground hallway to the Senate, from those office buildings to the actual Capitol. And he just wouldn't respond. He did he at least vocalized something in response. It was like, I said everything I'm going to say. He just would give no insight at all on his thinking about Biden's capacity to retain control of the nuclear arsenal. And did I ask any others? I think that's it. So what is that, 5? Now I'm pulling a Biden where I can't count up the senators. So it was Fetterman, Cardin, Warner, Manchin, Murphy. Yeah, 5. And none of them really directly answered the question. Closest was Cardin, who just reiterated his general support for Biden. Um, I do think Cardin is probably one of the less likely Democrats in the Senate to explicitly call on Biden to withdraw if it were ever to come to that. And yeah, it was very interesting to just witness again. The demeanor was like they had all just gotten the worst news in the world, or again, I can't say what was said in that meeting, but it clearly did not rejuvenate anybody's spirits, based on what I could gather. Um, so yeah, there's my roundup from Capitol Hill, and so obviously I just sat and watched the Biden press conference from the NATO summit. Now I have been to a NATO summit. I went to the one in Madrid 2 years ago. People who are longer term followers might recall. I reposted a little item I did on Substack / mtracy.net from July of 2022 on how even the Biden press conference then was fake in the sense that it's not that the questions were necessarily pre-approved, or I have no evidence of that, but he only calls on a pre-selected list of reporters, most of whom, at least when I was there, asked the most ridiculous, irrelevant questions. I remember when I was there, it was shortly after the Dobbs decision overturning Roe versus Wade, and Kelly O'Donnell of NBC News, who is now, I think, the dean of the White House Press Association. So she's like a big, icon of the White House traveling press corps. She was there. She had, NBC flew her out to Madrid to attend a big international summit that we're always told is about defending democracy against authoritarianism, blah, 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 blah. NATO is, at the cutting edge of preserving our freedoms. And she asked just a random question to Biden about the Supreme Court and Roe versus Wade, which, I'm not denying that's a issue, but you're at an international summit. There are foreign reporters there who want to hear presumably something to do with the substance of what was decided or deliberated at this summit, and she just bypassed it completely. And there were several other questions from dopey American reporters that were, similar. So that was just very annoying. And of course, I wasn't called on because it was not a sporadic, organic press conference. Now, funnily, I did sit in a press conference for Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, and he did do a spur of the moment sporadic press conference where he was just calling on anybody who his eyes fell upon who had their hands raised. So I asked him a question. You can pull up the clip from 2 years ago. One of the funny results of that exchange was that Turkish state media like profiled me, and they came and interviewed me, and there was a whole segment on what's the network, T something, I forget now. What is it? Okay, now I'm gonna Turkish station, TRT. Yeah, so they profiled me on TRT. It was funny. But the Biden press conference, it was like preordained. Again, not in the sense that I saw any indication that the questions themselves have been pre-submitted or pre-approved, but the reporters were pre-selected, and they're asking dumb enough questions that there's really no need for Biden to pre-approve them or for his staff to pre-approve them. Because, I mean, the journalists, the traveling press corps is a joke when it comes to foreign policy. They really have very little substantive knowledge. When if they are called upon to ask a question, they just want to kind of, move further the news cycle, whatever news cycle, is going to result in their little exchange getting, played on the Today Show or on CNN or whatever. They have very little baseline knowledge about foreign policy issues. I mean, has Kelly O'Donnell ever sat and actually read a full NATO communique, or could she talk intelligently about a variety of substantive issues involving NATO and Ukraine or whatever else that require some fairly extensive reading? I really doubt it. Now, they're not all dumb. Some of them have at least some working knowledge, but not anywhere near enough to like justify their existence collectively. Um, and you saw that tonight. I mean, yeah, I mean, Biden's cognitive status is a legitimate issue, clearly, but like, wouldn't the best thing to do to test his cognitive capacity be to ask him a series of substantive questions and then evaluate his ability to respond in a cogent manner? Like why? I mean, maybe I could see maybe a couple of questions about the political unrest and his debate performance and whatever. But like, there were only a handful, a couple of questions. I think definitely a minority of questions tonight that had anything to do with the substance at all, the NATO summit or foreign policy. Um, and even even the few foreign policy questions were a little bit, yeah, facile. I mean, the woman and from NPR who asked about Israel and what would Biden do differently with regard to the Israel-Gaza war. It's too open ended. Like, ask a specific question about a specific mistake or a specific action that you want to press him on. I mean, this should be basic stuff, but it's really bad. Um, I mean, I'll give some credit because there was a question asked about whether he would permit Ukraine to strike even further than has already been authorized into territorial Russia, which obviously has massive consequences potentially. Um, Even then, like, I would have formulated the question a little differently just to kind of get him on the record, delineating like the contours of the policy that he's put in place as of May to officially permit Ukraine to U.S. weaponry to strike inside Russia. That had been going on de facto even well before May. May 2023 was was an instance in which it was confirmed that there was a cross-border incursion by this Ukrainian military unit into Russia using U.S. Armaments. Now, that was before the official policy uh, shift had been announced by, preceded that by a year. But we still don't know the parameters of what the policy is now, because initially that policy decree was supposed to be, and Blinken, of course, was agitating for this. That authorization circa May was supposed to be about beating back Russia's latest offensive into Kharkiv. But then, as typically happens with how these policy directives kind of expand and take on like a bureaucratic momentum of their own. Um, Jake Sullivan subsequently said that it's not just limited to Kharkiv as to where Ukraine is authorized to strike inside Russia using U.S. weaponry. It could also occur, be permitted in other regions. Now, Biden did say, maybe it's not the greatest idea to allow Ukraine to use U.S. weapons to launch direct strikes on Moscow. Which, okay, I'll agree with that, I guess, but that's not the most reassuring articulation of whatever the limit is. I mean, there's no. I think the thing to deduce from that is that there really is no binding limit. It's just ad hoc. Because the U.S. is involved, pretty much in every missile strike that Ukraine launches, because you have this real-time intelligence sharing arrangement where, in some instances, the Ukrainian soldier on the ground just presses a button, and then that connects to a satellite system, by the way, provided by Elon Musk, at least in part, Starlink. And then you have an American or European military personnel sitting in a base in Poland or Bulgaria or Romania, who then selects the target and then basically facilitates the strike. So it's like a joint. That's why from the very beginning of the Ukraine war, I referred to it not even as a proxy war. I don't think that quite captures it. It's like a joint U.S.-Ukrainian war because operationally, the functionality of the U.S. and the Ukraine military have merged. That's why they want to bring them further and further into NATO. I'm actually not sure what the outcome was from this summit in terms of Ukraine's official status vis-a-vis NATO. But I know last year in Lithuania, when the summit was held there, they once again elevated Ukraine's status within NATO. By the way, Trump did that in 2020. I know that's lost to the ages. Basically ancient history now. I mean, so another thing that drove me crazy about this press conference is that, Biden repeats the pablum about Trump, wanting to undermine NATO. This is just conventional Democratic MSNBC rhetoric. They hone in on this one, like, pointless quote of Trump's. I think it was from February, where Trump said, Trump was recounting like his conversations that he had with European leaders, and said something about like, "Oh yeah, let Putin invade." I'm not getting the quote there exactly right, but it had no significance substantively. Again, maybe I'm too much of a stickler for the actual substance and the policy record and so forth. But Biden kind of beating the drum, and Democrats everywhere do this. It's like Trump being this, he's going to abandon NATO. He's going to undermine NATO and sabotage it. He's going to let Putin conquer Ukraine and all this stuff. I mean, none of this has any relation to the actual substantive policy record of the Trump administration, or, so far as anybody can tell, their plans for a second administration. I mean, I did my did you all the service of actually reading this policy proposal that was submitted to Trump on the Ukraine war for a couple of weeks ago from General Keith Kellogg, who is the national security advisor to Mike Pence, and Fred Fleitz, who is also in the Trump administration, and a longtime John Bolton understudy, who was on the National Security Council in the Trump administration, and they drafted a framework for how Trump can resolve the Ukrainian war and submitted it to him. And it was reported that he received it, and I don't know what he did with it exactly, but he hasn't given any specifics about how he's going to magically end the Ukraine war in 24 hours, supposedly. We're all supposed to just take it on faith, and he's such a smart guy, and so like not ask for any further details, which I don't accept. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's infantile. If that's your mentality, if that's a mentality that you accept, then you're behaving in an infantile manner. I don't care how many MAGA hats you own. That's just ridiculous. So that hardline plan was submitted to Trump, and I say hardline because it contains policy prescriptions about how the U.S. will continue to arm Ukraine and continue to amass armaments on the Russian border and continue to bolster U.S. Military ties with Ukraine. So this, how does that going to resolve the Ukrainian war if it flies in the face of Putin's core grievances? I don't know. Maybe Trump will just wave a wand and cast a magic spell or something. It would be nice if occasionally, we're talking a lot about Biden lately, rightly so, but Trump, by my best estimation, has not done even a mildly challenging interview since September of 2023. Definitely, maybe there's a couple that I might have missed, but and people can correct me. But since September of 2023 was the last time he actually did an interview that was not just full-on ass-kissing, brown-nosing. Now he'll occasionally do the Logan Paul, or I forget which Paul, Logan or Jake Paul podcast, where they just tell him, "Mr. President, you're so wonderful. How do you do it?" That's like the thrust of the questioning. They just let him ramble, and they don't, interject. They don't steer the interview in any way towards some kind of substantive illumination of a position, or he'll go on like some Fox and Friends podcast thing, and they'll ask him how he prays. I mean, he'll go on Dr. Phil, and Dr. Phil will ask him, "How do you get up in the morning? How do you do it?" I mean, that's like the thrust of the questioning. So yeah, and Biden has plenty of problems, but Trump has been barely screwed. I mean, somebody should give me a copy. I mean, he'll go on Hannity and just do a Hannity interview, which is like the opposite of any kind of scrutiny. If anybody can send me an interview that Trump has done in calendar year 2024, in which he actually was probed in a substantive fashion on his policy positions, please pass it along because I don't think it exists. Um, and so one of the problems with this press conference that Biden just did is that everybody was, fixated on analyzing any little flub he might make, or they're looking to see if he is lucid and what his performance is like. Which, again, understandable given the events of the past 2 weeks. But nobody cares about the substance. I mean, Biden basically declared uh, that he's going. To the credit of David Sanger from the New York Times, at least he raised this issue. It wasn't the best question, but in terms of its formulation, but at least he raised it, which is that in the NATO summit communique, or I think they actually call it a declaration. There are communiques, I think, that are more comprehensive, that are only put out every 5 or 10 years. I think every 10 years. But that the most recent one was the one I was at in 2022. This is a more like lower level collective statement by NATO. I think they call it a declaration. But in this declaration, they accuse, meaning NATO collectively, every member state, because they sign on to this declaration, accuses China of providing material support to Russia for the war in Ukraine, and basically comes closer than NATO ever has in designating China an official enemy. So Biden actually expanded on that in the press conference when David Sanger raised the issue from the New York Times, and was talking about how China needs to be coerced more aggressively to cut off trade relations with Europe. And so this is hastening and accelerating bloc conflict in the international system, with the two main boogeymen being China and Russia. And that nobody cares about that, I guess. Partly because Trump basically has the same fundamental positions. I'm going to have a piece tomorrow. Hopefully, I'm almost done with it on the Project 2025 hysteria. I mean, go and actually read. I'm not going to address it fully here. I'll save it. But I mean, the liberal hysteria on that is ridiculous. And then also the MAGA quote unquote anti-establishment cheerleading for what they think are like these glories, or this the anti-establishmentarianism of Project 2025 is also a joke. I mean, go and I'll talk about it probably tomorrow or the next day, because it's just it's mind-bending. So nobody cares about the substance of what Biden actually articulates in terms of foreign policy in this press conference. They're all trying to nitpick every little flub. I mean, I do think that so I have these running Biden withdrawal odds, just as like a mental, I don't know, shortcut or a heuristic, just to assess based on the incoming data and evidence, like what is the probability of Biden withdrawing his candidacy. I think the high point of my odds, and maybe this was too high, was 40%. This was last week. And I revised it up yesterday because mainly because the first Democratic senator came out and explicitly said that Biden ought to withdraw. That was Peter Welch, the Democratic senator from Vermont. By the way, interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders, the other senator from Vermont, technically independent but caucuses with the Democrats, he's been among the most strident, as far as I can tell, in declaring support for Biden, meaning declaring support for him remaining the presumptive Democratic nominee. But his colleague, his colleague from Vermont, took a different view. So I revised it up. I think it was to 35% last night. Not that anybody should care about the specific number exactly, but just like my little mental shortcut. And yeah, I have been going in kind of like 5% increments. I don't know why exactly. It's just somewhat arbitrary. So it was 35 coming into this press conference, and obviously I left open the possibility that Biden could really collapse, or Biden could do something that was reminiscent of his debate performance, where he just lost his train of thought. He couldn't complete a sentence, and he looked awful. He had this vacant stare or whatever. But I think this was probably better than. I think it was slightly better than maybe I would have expected in terms of his competence in delivering his message and speaking and looking like he's in command of his faculties. Now, that's totally different from the substantive evaluation of his remarks, which were terrible, I think. I mean, and terrible in a way that doesn't set him apart from Trump, really, because Trump has pretty much identical policy positions on this stuff in terms of, saber rattling Russia and China, trying to, detach China from the international system, to isolate it and confront it, etc., which is a disastrous long-term prospectus, I think. But in terms of just like the sheer raw competence, it seemed like it was fairly, I don't know, it didn't blow, it didn't blow my mind in terms of his raw power of uh, articulation or anything, but it seemed like reasonably competent by his fairly low standards. Um, but I did see that apparently it was pre-planned. Jim Himes, the ranking Democratic member of the House Intelligence Committee, I think almost immediately after Biden completed the NATO press conference, put out a statement explicitly calling on Biden to withdraw. This is Jim Himes, Connecticut congressman. And there are reports that there's going to be more. I saw a report of potentially dozens of additional Democratic House members, perhaps senators, not exactly clear, who will make additional statements publicly calling on Biden to withdraw. Now, I know people couldn't want to like read between the lines of stuff that Biden said when he adamantly insists that he's continuing to run the race. He's going to beat Trump. He's not withdrawing. He's going to be the Democratic nominee. The delegates are going to nominate him. And I guess they're like little maybe turns of phrase or connotations that people can say, oh, maybe he's leaving the door open to not running anymore. But I think that's a stretch. I mean, it is true that politicians, when they're under pressure, will at least make a public showing of being adamant in their resolve to keep barreling forward until the very last moment when they have to wave the white flag. But it's just again, unprecedented stuff happens all the time. So I'm not saying that just because something is unprecedented, it couldn't possibly happen. I have the odds at 30%. I revised them down after that press conference, given the moderately serviceable performance from 35 to 30%. But it would just be so unprecedented in the annals of political history for a president to voluntarily relinquish power when they're virtually assured a major party nomination. LBJ is not a good parallel, really. I know that's invoked by people, often Democratic insider types who want Biden to withdraw because that's the desired outcome to their wish casting, in part by invoking this Lyndon Johnson parallel. I mentioned this before, I think, on the stream, but Lyndon Johnson was seeing his grip over the Democratic Party loosen. I mean, Lyndon Johnson announced that he was not going to run for re-election only after Eugene McCarthy nearly beat him in the New Hampshire primary. And then after Robert F. Kennedy Sr. indicated that he was going to be getting in the race himself for the Democratic nomination. Now, 1968, recall, is before the advent of like the modern primary era, where you have, most states have binding primary elections that the delegates are then in theory bound to adhere to in terms of who they cast their vote for on the roll call vote for the nomination. 1968, I mean, primary contests would often, primary elections, like the few that did happen, it was only not very even that many states held primary elections in the 60s. New Hampshire was one of the long-standing exceptions. It's why they're the first in the nation primary, and so on and so forth. But in 1968, 1968 was before the dawn of the modern primary era, where it's much more in the hands of the electoral process, outside the hands of like a centralized party system. Yeah, I know people think the DNC just controls everything, and look, the DNC does have certain powers, but compared to the 1960s and before, the Central Party Committee has much less influence on dictating outcomes. I mean, Hubert Humphrey was selected by party bosses in 1968. And Hubert Humphrey competed in very few primaries. I should have looked this up. I think I mentioned this last week. Hubert Humphrey competed in, I think, if he did compete in any primaries, it wasn't very many. So yes, so it's just different because Lyndon Johnson saw his power being taken away from him in March of '68, and therefore resigned because it was then questionable whether he would be able to secure the nomination of the Democratic Party to run for re-election. Biden got it. Now, barring some, crazy interpretation of the conscience clause in the DNC convention bylaws, whereby delegates who are pledged, and they're called pledged delegates, pledged to Biden in accordance with the primary election outcome in their states, just invoke some kind of conscience clause and therefore don't vote for him. You barring anything like that, Biden, like based on like what had been customarily the letter of the law for the primary elections, Biden's got it. So it's just like LBJ is not an apt parallel, really. Neither is Richard Nixon for a whole host of other reasons. Hopefully, I don't have to explain that. That being said, it's very possible that Biden could do something unprecedented. I'm putting it at 30%. That's way high in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's almost unthinkable that a president who had already obtained effectively his major party's nomination would even be it would even be fathomable that he might voluntarily relinquish that. But I don't necessarily discount the possibility, as evidenced by my estimation of 30% odds. But I did revise them down, marginally tonight after the press conference because I thought, it was not a catastrophe, anything like the debate. Now, will it stem the flood of potential public statements? Evidently not. Jim Himes just gave one of them. But if you tally up all the Democratic members of Congress who have so far made public statements calling on Biden to withdraw, it's still only it's probably up to 6% now in the in aggregate within the, if you add up the House members and the Senate members. I think it's only it's maybe 12 or 13 or 14, something like that. So it's 6, maybe it's up to 7%. I'm not sure, but that's still 94% of elected Democrats in the Congress who are not calling on Biden to withdraw. Now that could change, I guess. And I don't know. I mean, the mood was so ominous amongst these Democrats, as I was talking about before, who came out of that meeting at the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, that I don't know. It's still an open question to some extent, but I don't know. I just don't. At a certain point, you have to kind of, take. I'm not saying take Biden at his word. That's maybe the wrong way of putting it. But how many more ways can he adamantly insist that he's going to remain in the race, right? And something interesting among the Democratic members of Congress, at least last I checked, who have called on him to resign, the small minority, is that there's no members of the Congressional Black Caucus, which Biden views as one of his bulwarks of support, right? It's mostly white Democrats. Now, that unto itself is not that telling, but I think the only non-white, there's maybe some Asians. Mark Takano, Angie Craig is some kind of Asian, looks like. I'm not sure. But they're not the most natural Biden constituency. If you go back to the 2020 primaries, where Biden was elevated, decisively by his support among older, especially Southern Black voters, particularly in South Carolina. That's how he won the nomination in 2020. And none of those people have defected from him yet. So I'm just not sure that an affluent suburban Democrat who is making a calculation that maybe they could stand a better chance of winning in November if they somewhat disassociate themselves from Biden. I'm just not sure that has this determinative an influence on him, but this is conjecture. Biden did say in the press conference that he understands, because he spent so much time in the Senate, that there are certain, concessions or adjustments that have to be made by people running in their own district as to how they want to situate themselves in relation to the top of the ticket, to the presidential nominee, and he doesn't like begrudge that. So I don't know. It's just it's hard to say, but it's strange times. Okay, so yeah, somebody says I got a little sun. Yeah, I did get way sunburned today. It was blasting hot, and the sun was beaming. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I wasn't sunbathing. That would be a that wouldn't be a pretty sight. But I was in the sun a lot today. So yeah, I look a little I guess tan. Hopefully not burned. I don't think I'm burned, at least slightly. But I just didn't think to do sunscreen. Uh, let's see. Andrew says the All In Pod was a softball Q&A. Yeah, that was. And then Art Memes Matter says All In Podcast. Watch it. I did watch it. It was a joke. Sorry, I don't hate David Sachs. If not for David Sachs, like I wouldn't have been doing the call-in app, which he was a funder of. I don't know if it's defunct now or not, but I haven't used it in a while. But the All In Podcast. Okay, look how that came about. David Sachs hosted, which is his right if he has the means, a massive fundraiser in San Francisco for Trump. Trump attends the fundraiser. I don't know, gets I don't know how many millions. And then Trump appears on the podcast of one of his mega donors. Okay. So anybody who's congratulating Trump for having the gumption to appear on the podcast of one of his mega donors, please. I mean, this is another instance of how the MAGA, it is a little bit of a cult mentality. I'm sorry to say, where you think it's just awesome and it's so laudable and courageous for Trump to go on a pod. It's not that's not a journalistic interview of any sort. Go on the podcast of a mega donor. Any other politician who did that, they would be rightly and roundly ridiculed, but not Trump. Trump just like floats above it all and like the mythology of people who follow him. And he also deceived the audience on that. He made some, passing remark about how like NATO, he said that one of the things that Biden did wrong in the run up to the Ukraine war was that he said something about NATO and that angered Putin. So he was referring to Biden and the administration reiterating their position that NATO has the open door policy where Ukraine can autonomously, decide to seek admission to NATO. Now that's all, getting into the substance of that policy. I'm not looking to really dwell on it at the moment. You could maybe predict my views on that, but it didn't take that much effort to point out, which I did subsequent to that All In podcast interview, that Trump's administration had the same policy and had made the same sort of provocative statements vis-a-vis Ukraine's prospective admission into NATO. Go look at Mike Pompeo, who never had a rift with Trump as far as we can tell. Oh, by the way, who's going to be one of the headline primetime speakers at the Republican convention next week? Mike Pompeo. So anybody who thinks that there's like this new era of MAGA and Mike Pompeo is not invited to the party, you're just, deluding yourself. Mike Pompeo, who is Trump's Secretary of State for about 3 years, said the same stuff that Biden and Blinken said about Ukraine and its prospective membership in NATO. So what is Trump talking about? He's just basically telling somebody who gave him a lot of money what he wants to hear. It doesn't align at all with Trump's record. So yeah, I do think that one of the basics of how you evaluate what a politician says is check it against their actual record, and nobody else wants to do that. But I'm going to keep doing it. Let's see. Joey Frank says, we riding with Biden. Good for you. I'm assuming that's sarcastic, but I can't say for certain. Will says, I'm scrolling back from earlier. Oh no, sorry, that's way earlier. Somebody says, does anybody have any intelligent comments? Come on, people. Glad to see you. Okay, that's nice. Neoliberal Dunkin' Donuts, which I find that an amusing surname. or using a handle. It says neoliberalism has Parkinson's. Okay. VP Trump will take over. Yeah, I mean there was a ridiculous statement that Biden made. This is a genuine. So the challenge with Biden's current state is obviously he's in. I mean the debate proved that Biden is in a rather extreme state of cognitive decline that seems to have fairly rapidly accelerated lately. Okay, not that he hadn't been in that state of decline before, but this stuff can accelerate. Um, and but Biden, even like long ago, when he was not in a state of obvious cognitive decline, Biden would occasionally make these kind of verbal miscues or hiccups or like retrieve the wrong word. So go and watch Biden's remarks when he was selected by Barack Obama as his vice president in August of 2008, or shortly thereafter. Like Biden is introducing, or maybe I'll pull this up. No, I'm not going to find it. But Biden's like introducing Obama, and he says, the next president, ladies and gentlemen, the next president of the United States, Barack America. So he calls him Barack America. And, in 2008, nobody thought that Biden was so, cognitively diminished that he couldn't distinguish between Barack Obama and Barack America. It was just like a miscue or something. And I think that's probably what explains Biden saying Vice President Trump rather than Vice President Harris. I think that the indicators of cognitive decline are more when he loses his train of thought, or he can't complete a sentence, or like at the debate when he had that vacant stare and his mouth was agape, and his voice was whispery and hushed and raspy, and he just looked like befuddled. That's more an indicator of a cognitive decline, I would think. Like, look, I'm not a doctor, than him making one of these verbal miscues, which I mean everybody does occasionally make. I mean, it is true that Trump confused Nikki Haley with Nancy Pelosi in like January during the primaries, and I'm not saying that means Trump is in cognitive decline either. It's just like one of these occasional verbal miscues. I've done it. I mean, sometimes I'll go back and watch or listen to like a stream or some kind of podcast or appearance, or just like me speaking extemporaneously, and I'll notice that I just like made a weird blunder where I said somebody else's name other than what I meant, or like one of these sort of I don't know, just occasional miscues. Now, I'm not trying to defend Biden from allegations that he's in a state of cognitive decline. I'm literally going around to every Democrat I can, asking them if they seriously think that Biden ought to be in charge of the nuclear arsenal at age 86. I'm just saying that there are like some distinctions that can maybe be made that probably get conflated, but it's not that important. Tim Apple. So Trump called Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, Tim Apple, right? So yeah, stuff like that happens. Somebody asked me, do you think Blinken looks rattled? Blinken looking rattled? I think I saw like a screen grab of him looking like concerned, but I'm not sure if that was from recently. I know he was in the audience. He was in like the front row at the press conference alongside Blinken and Lloyd Austin, but I didn't notice him looking particularly rattled. But maybe I missed something. Let's see. Biden just gave a war rally speech. This is from MB. Biden just gave a war rally speech, and debate is about his cognitive ability. I mean, that's what I was just talking about before. Nobody cares about the substance of what was said. Again, because everybody was transfixed on, analyzing his basic competency and his lucidity, which, again, I don't deny is a legitimate issue, but like you would think people could, do several things at once, meaning in the media where they're like, okay, yeah, it is warranted to pay attention to whether he can function just in terms of his enunciation of words and thoughts and sentences, etc. But let's also like pay a little bit of attention to the actual substance of what he's saying. Do we want to just celebrate the escalation of bloc conflict between the United States and NATO and China and Russia. Isn't that something that maybe like deserves a little bit more scrutiny or debate before we all just like start cheering for it and hurtle into oblivion potentially? You'd think so, but evidently not. Somebody asked me, "How do you remain unbothered and confident when people always make negative comments about your appearance?" I mean, why would I be bothered by that? I mean, it's just, I mean, some people need to. I'm not a fitness influencer. I'm not an aspiring male model. I'm not doing anything that is based on like my having like a particularly good appearance. So like if people focus on that, it's just like schoolyard bully type nonsense. It just doesn't affect me. I can't say with absolute certainty it doesn't affect me at all, but at least in terms of like my access to my conscious mind, it just does not bother me. If somebody pointed out that I made an error in like an article or I had a fact wrong, that would bother me. People saying, "Oh, you look ugly." I mean, why would I care? I mean, are you my, like, you're not my romantic partner or something, right? So like, I have no interest in like, I don't know, it's just petty nonsense. So, but I think most people can't. I'm an unusual personality type. I will grant that. So I think most people would be affected by that. It probably is much more so with women. That I'll also probably grant. But I just don't care. I mean, if that's what you're talking about or focused on, then that's really your own problem. I mean, stop being fixated on petty nonsense. Somebody says, "This is my first time hearing you after seeing you for years on Twitter, and you look better than your avatar implies." LMAO. I mean, it's funny. Like, so the story of my Twitter avatar, it's the avatar I use for everything. Is in 2016. I don't know if this guy is still around. This guy, like, would you go around? He just messaged me offering to make me an avatar, uh, gratis, because I had one that was like weird that I was looking to get rid of, that I had used for a couple of years. It was which was also a cartoon, but it was like really kind of it was more garish. Um, and this guy was in like he was in some WikiLeaks adjacent community. I'm not sure exactly, but he would like make avatars for people with like a WikiLeaks theme. Uh, or like a vaguely WikiLeaks theme. So that's like kind of what he did. So if like you look at my little like face on the avatar, it's like a bluish color that's reminiscent of the WikiLeaks hourglass type symbol thing. Is it an hourglass or whatever it is? Um, uh, so yeah, I've just been using that because I don't see any real reason to change it. But the funny thing is, like, some people will say, um, "You're much uglier than your avatar. Like, what you're using an avatar to mask how ugly you are." And then other people will say, "Oh, you look surprisingly better than your avatar." I mean, okay, it's just not something that I'm going to pay much mind to. But if you want to talk about it, okay, go ahead. Um, what else? Somebody says, "Love you, MT. Love you too." Joe says, "Wait, you're not a fit influence." Wait, now I'm doing a Biden stammer. Somebody says, "Wait, you're not a fitness influencer?" No, sadly not. I don't know how constructive my influence would be in that field. Da, 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 da. Okay, everybody, I think that's about it for tonight. I don't have to go ramble on for that much longer. Hopefully, you were edified by this slightly. Again, I did some reporting today from Capitol Hill, as I discussed earlier. If you're watching live and you came late, you can just go back and rewind or watch earlier portions of the stream. Like I said, I'm going to have an article tomorrow. Hopefully, it's almost done on the Project 2025 mania, which people are like wildly misconstruing from multiple directions. And um, then I'm going to be going straight from here in DC to Milwaukee for the Republican convention. Going to be covering that for Glenn Greenwald's show and for other stuff or on other platforms. So I'll probably be doing a fair amount of additional streams in the coming days. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Seems to have a pretty good turnout, I think. And we'll reconvene soon. Goodbye.